Hello, and welcome to the fourth and final installment of Podcast for Standard and Benchmark 3.2 for 10th grade biology. In this podcast, we'll be talking about cellular respiration, including glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and electron transport. We'll also be looking at some similarities and differences between the cellular respiration and photosynthesis. For Kalani High School, this is the Allaire Report, and I'm your host, Mr. Allaire. Now, before we talk about the process of cellular respiration, we need to first understand that we, as living things, need to eat food in order to survive. Food provides living things with the chemicals that they need to grow and reproduce. Food provides the raw materials that our body needs, including protein, carbohydrates, and lipids, and it also provides a source of energy, or ATP, adenosine triphosphate. By consuming food, we begin the process of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the process that releases energy by breaking down food molecules in the presence of oxygen. We're going to break down cellular respiration into three parts: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and electron transport. We're also going to take some time to talk about an additional step called fermentation, which occurs when there is no oxygen available. So let's take a couple of minutes and look at the three steps as well as fermentation, starting with glycolysis. Now, you'll remember from class our discussion of the reactants involved in cellular respiration are oxygen and sugar. In glycolysis, this is a process in which one molecule of glucose, a sugar, is broken down in half. Glucose is a 6-carbon sugar, so it's broken down into two 3-carbon molecules. In the Krebs cycle, pyruvic acid is broken down into carbon dioxide through a few different energy-extracting reactions. In electron transport, this uses high-energy electrons from the Krebs cycle to convert ADP into ATP. And last but not least, fermentation, which is a process that occurs in the absence of oxygen, is a process that forms lactic acid or alcohol. There are two different types of fermentation. We're going to be focusing on the lactic acid fermentation. Now, just by looking at these descriptions of glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and electron transport, you may already notice some similarities between cellular respiration and photosynthesis. If you do, that's good. But let's take a moment to look at the cellular respiration equation. Cellular respiration, like photosynthesis, is basically one big chemical reaction. In this reaction, our two reactants are oxygen and sugar, specifically glucose, which has a formula of C6H12O6. The products of this reaction are carbon dioxide, CO2, water, H2O, and energy. The energy that's released as the result of cellular respiration is heat. This is what gives us a nice, steady body temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, or 37 degrees Celsius. Looking at this flowchart, you can see the three different steps involved in cellular respiration, starting with glycolysis, which has a red square around it, followed by the Krebs cycle and electron transport that have the green rectangle around it. Now, Krebs cycle and electron transport occur when oxygen is available to your cells. If there's no oxygen available, fermentation occurs, and which you can see in the yellow rectangle. Both fermentation and cellular respiration start with the process known as glycolysis. And glycolysis is once again the breaking down of glucose into simpler, more manageable carbon molecules. You'll remember that photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplasts of plant cells. Cellular respiration takes place in the mitochondria of animal cells. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, and they produce all of the energy that humans and other animals use. If you take a look at the diagram that you see in front of you, you'll see that we have glycolysis, which is where the glucose comes in, followed by the Krebs cycle and the electron transport system, which occur directly in the mitochondria. So let's start with glycolysis. Before glycolysis can begin, you have to eat something. When you eat food, your body uses enzymes and other chemicals to break down that food to get to the sugars. Once your body has extracted the glucose, your cells use 2 ATP molecules to break down that glucose. During this process, 4 high-energy electrons are removed, and they get scooped up by NAD, which quickly becomes NADH. Now, this may remind you of the NADPH in photosynthesis. It's kind of the same idea. It's a special carrier of high-energy electrons. The 4 ATP molecules are created along with 2 molecules of something called pyruvic acid. Once pyruvic acid is created through glycolysis, it moves into the mitochondrion. Pyruvic acid is then rearranged to become a different kind of acid called citric acid, which is a 6-carbon molecule. Once the pyruvic acid has been converted and rearranged into citric acid, again a 6-carbon molecule, the citric acid can then be broken down. 1 carbon from the citric acid forms a carbon dioxide molecule. We are then left with a 5-carbon compound. From this 5-carbon compound, another carbon leaves to form more carbon dioxide. At the same time, ATP is created, and we are left with a 4-carbon compound that's recycled back to the beginning of the Krebs cycle to begin the process all over again. When thinking about these processes, it's important to remember that they are continuous. They don't stop, they don't start, they're just always going. Now you'll remember during glycolysis, along with the formation of 4 ATP molecules and the 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, there were also 4 high-energy electrons scooped up and removed by NAD to become NADH. Again, NADH are special high-energy electron carriers. This brings us to the electron transport chain. During the electron transport chain, high-energy electrons are passed into and along this chain from one carrier protein to another. At the end of this protein chain is an enzyme that combines the high-energy electrons with hydrogen ions and oxygen to form water, H2O. As the electrons are being transported, their energy is used to transport hydrogen ions across the membrane of the mitochondria, where hydrogen ions can build up, creating a positive charge. The other side of the membrane, therefore, will have a negative charge. And as we've discussed many times, opposite charges will attract. Just like in photosynthesis, the hydrogen ions can't get through the membrane by themselves, so they have help from an enzyme called ATP synthase. As the hydrogen ions pass through the membrane, the synthase spins, and each time it rotates, it converts ADP into ATP. For each pair of electrons, 3 ATP molecules are created. Now you need to remember that the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain occur in the presence of oxygen. There are occasions when oxygen is not available to your cells. When this occurs, you have fermentation. Instead of pyruvic acid being converted into citric acid, it is converted into something called lactic acid. Lactic acid is produced in your muscles during rapid exercise when your body cannot supply enough oxygen to the tissues. For those of you that work out or participate in athletics, this is the sharp, intense burning sensation produced by your muscles during rapid exercise and physical activity. Finishing off this section, let's do a little comparing of photosynthesis and cell respiration. Photosynthesis is about energy storage. Cell respiration is about energy release. Photosynthesis occurs in chloroplasts, cellular respiration in the mitochondria. In photosynthesis, the reactants are carbon dioxide and water, and they produce glucose and oxygen. In cellular respiration, it's pretty much the opposite, where the reactants are glucose and oxygen, and the products are carbon dioxide and water. Well, this is the end of Part D, and the end of Standard and Benchmark 3.2. So please go back, review this podcast, as well as all of the other podcasts for this benchmark and standard. If you have any questions, Please feel free to ask in class, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Bye-bye.